that's recording in progress. And with this, I'll hand it over to Dylan.
Hi everyone, so as Raghavi said, I'm Gildelen. My full name is Gildelen Aty-Biyo, and I'm also a researcher here. And I have a difficult work of introducing Professor Crenshaw, who I do agree also doesn't need to be introduced, but I try my best to be brief. So Professor Crenshaw is a professor of law at Columbia Law School and UCLA, and your work focuses on civil rights, critical race theory, constitutional law, Black feminist legal theory, as well as the intersection between race, gender, and law. And in 1989, in your seminal article, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, you coined the term intersectionality to describe the overlapping system of oppression that people, especially Black women, face. And you are also the co-founder of the African American Policy Forum, and the role of this forum, of this think tank, is to build bridges between academia and public discourse. And you served on many committees and you've been a rapporteur for many institutions, but I'm not going to list here. But just to say that we are very happy and honored to have you here. And Raghavi already said what you're going to talk about, but I'm just going to add that here, the goal is to go beyond academia and the academic work, but also to touch about the challenges that researchers of color, especially Black scholars, face right now in this environment where there are a lot of attacks and backlash against all of this work and anti-discrimination work. So now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And more importantly, thank you for this opportunity to spend time with all of you engaging in these ideas. When I first heard from you about this decolonizing project, I was very excited to have this opportunity, especially as you'll probably hear once I get into more war stories about the origins of critical race theory. It came out of student formations just like this. So it is a special honor to come full circle to have these conversations. And along the last thing that you said, which is we want to talk about these ideas, not simply in terms of academic production, but also in terms of our lives and in terms of the broader society in which this retrenchment is happening. I shifted the title just a little bit because I wanted to illustrate clearly what's at stake in these debates. So I've now framed this, the American War on Wokeness, how mainstreaming of white nationalism happened. There's a lot packed in there, but the main thing that is packed in there is that the anti-woke war that we're in, and I'm going to trouble that a little bit, is not simply an academic project. It's not simply a response of people who disagree with the work. It actually is a project of centering a particular nationalistic set of priorities and ideas as the center of gravity in American politics. I will be speaking mostly about what's happening in the US with an assumption that there will be many inferences and connections that will be drawn from this story, because as you said, this is a story that's playing out pretty much around the world. I'll add this one last observation. It is clear to me that the developments that are happening in one place travel fairly quickly to other places. If the forces of retrenchment, if the forces of fascism are able to travel at lightning speed, it behooves us to figure out how our efforts to resist, how our efforts to speak the many languages of resistance need to be far more integrated than they currently are. So all opportunities like this that allow us to do that are valuable to me. So thank you for this opportunity. Now let me see if I'm able to advance this myself. And the answer to that would be no. Yes. Okay. But you have to tell me what you pressed.
I think it works like, yeah, it works with this.
Okay, wonderful. So I want to start by just sharing a few images, snapshots about what the current moment of the war on wokeness looks like. So actually, while I was here, a big controversy exploded on the American scene that shows the next battleground in this war on wokeness. So this is a picture of Amanda Gorman. She is a young poet who gave the inaugural poem during the inauguration of President Biden. It was widely, warmly received. A poem called The Hill We Climb that represents pretty much the liberal view of American society on a pathway to betterment, not having yet arrived, still struggling, still moving onward and upward. A lot of us have things to say about whether this idea that we're always getting better is actually accurate, but it does express a sort of common mainstream view. We have not yet arrived, but we're still trying to get there. One person in Florida took issue with the fact that this poem was made available to elementary school students. Under the existing law in Florida, she was able to oppose this poem and have it taken out of the curriculum and put in another place outside of where students who were in elementary school could have access to it. I wanted you to just notice, you don't have to really have any awareness of the thing that you are objecting in order for your objection to be founded. As you can see, this person didn't even know who wrote the poem. She thought it was Oprah Winfrey who had written this poem. She hadn't read the poem. I thought that was just too delicious to pass up. But that's just one site of the war on wokeness. There are many others. In that same state, there was an objection to a film that was being shown in a K through 12 class. The film was about Ruby Bridges. Ruby Bridges is a young Black girl who integrated New Orleans schools at the age of 6. She has written an autobiography. This film was based on her life. This was objected to on the basis of it being a divisive concept, and that it made white children feel bad. So that was taken out of the classroom. There's also an objection and an edit to a school textbook about the Montgomery bus boycott. That was the boycott that was prompted by the refusal to give up a seat to a white person. The editors wanted to take out that the segregation system was a racial system. They took out the fact that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person. They didn't want a racial story to be actually spoken about. So this is just a sense of how deeply the effort to de-racialize American race history goes and how much authority goes along with it. This is just a snapshot of all of the books that have been banned. It is interesting to know that of the top 5 banned books of fiction, nonfiction, and adult books in the US for the year 2022, they are all by Black women. So again, the project that is going on in the United States is a racially targeted, gendered project. Disproportionately, the books that are being banned are by socially marginalized people. They are also disproportionately written by LGBTQIA authors. So this is a politic that is particular, and it is not a puzzle. It's also a politic that has deeply violent imagery attached to it. This is Trump basically calling on people to lay down their very lives to defend the United States against critical race theory. So although this is framed as an ideological conflict, it is one that is deeply political and carries forward some of the sensitivities and sensibilities of white nationalist argumentation that has been part of the American tradition for centuries. This is just the most recent articulation of why critical race theory has to be fought. It is dangerous philosophical poisoning in the bloodstream of America. So I want to say something about how it happened. And I want to trouble the understanding that this only is a product of the metastasizing of right-wing ideology. It is, in fact, that, but there are also permissions, there are conditions of possibility that go to liberal ambivalence about the content of work that has been framed as critical race theory, that's been framed as intersectionality, queer theory, and other intellectual political projects. This current moment began with an executive order that was signed by Trump in 2020, September 22. It in turn came just a month after a debate with then candidate Biden, in which he was asked to denounce the neo-fascist element called the Proud Boys. He refused to denounce it, instead said stand by to the Proud Boys. So there was a sense that that stand by was not only not a repudiation, but it was also a signal that something would be in the offing to further mobilize them on his behalf. This executive order was widely seen as that thing. In this executive order, Trump lists a whole range of ideas, such as implicit bias, such as structural racism, intersectionality. These have all been framed in this executive order as anti-white, as reverse discrimination, and were thus banned from all federal government educational or training activities. This was far more damaging than many people believed, because the federal government is the most significant employer in the American economy. It's not just federal employees that were impacted by this, but also grantees, which included civil rights organizations like the Urban League or the Center for Fair Housing, which basically were told that they could not use the term structural racism to talk about, well, structural racism in the housing industry. So this is where it started. It was framed again as a left-wing project to destroy the nation. The frame was that critical race theory and all of these ideas would dissolve the civic bonds that tie us together. There's good news and bad news. The good news was that it was immediately challenged in court, and the order was enjoined. As you all know, he eventually lost the election. President Biden rescinded the order within the first week of his presidency, but even that was too late. As we like to say, the horse had already left the barn. The idea that work against wokeness could actually be the vehicle through which MAGA sensibilities could actually come to the center of American politics was out and about. So within a 6-month period of time, states across the United States took up this kind of ban against what they called divisive concepts. Now, I want to step back just for a moment and make it clear that these are not new ideas. These are ideas that have been in the American populace for centuries. Most recently, the idea that diversity is a code word for white genocide has been a popularized idea among the right in American society. You can see here that this was found on a billboard. My colleague Cheryl Harris took a picture of this when she was driving through Texas. Also another billboard, anti-racist is a code word for anti-white. This is just the most recent articulation of it, but if we go back into history during Brown versus Board of Education, integration was framed as an assault on the rights of white children to go to segregated schools. They were framed as equal rights. Blacks' right to integration was the counter or was simply the opposite side of white rights to segregation. These were seen by many people as equal claims upon the law. Therefore, the law could not step in and make a decision between these two rights. The right to get service at a lunch counter was framed as a right against or a violation of the rights of those who own the lunch counters. My civil rights are violated if I'm forced to serve somebody that I don't want to serve. So the idea that equal rights is anti-white, the idea that equality deprives other people of their rights to exclude, that is deeply part of American culture. It is precisely those rights that the civil rights movement repudiated. It's precisely those rights that critical race theory interrogates. It's precisely those rights that link this moment to even enslavement, in which liberation of enslaved people was seen as depriving those who owned them of their property rights. So this is not new. What is fascinating about its not newness is how quickly it was able to be dug up and remobilized as part of a centrist campaign in the American populace. Of course, perhaps you recognize this is a picture from the January 6th takeover or attempted coup in the American Capitol. This is the first time that the Confederate flag, this is the flag of the former slaveholders, actually breached the Capitol. And it breached the Capitol through this effort to take back our country. Take back our country from whom? The idea, of course, was that the country was being lost to a coalition of multiracial, racially and other marginalized people that effectively elected President Biden. So even the claim about the election being stolen was a racialized claim. And if there's any doubt about it, this symbolism underscored precisely the racial politics that were at play. But it wasn't just that that made the central mainstreaming of this white nationalist sensibility work. Fox News played a huge role, not only in affirming a grievance politics that was an overlay to the idea of white replacement, the idea that diversity and the coming majority, non-majority moment was a moment of white angst, but the ability to attach that angst to something concrete that they could say they were against. That's where critical race theory came into the story. This individual, Christopher Rufo, went on Fox News and basically made the claim that the thing that you're scared about, the thing that you ought to worry about, the thing that we have to fight like our lives depend on, it has a name, and it's called critical race theory. So in a period of less than, as you can see, a year, the mentions of critical race theory increased from 3 in June of 2020 to 901 in 2021. So this was a campaign of disinformation that was designed expressly to give people a target. But here is the thing. Rufo himself has made it clear that the content of critical race theory has nothing to do with the campaign against critical race theory. In fact, he and others have said that it doesn't really matter what critical race theorists do or what they say they do. What matters is what we can do with it. And what we can do with it is to freeze the brand, to drive up negative perceptions, to turn it toxic, so that the term will be used to refer to a range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans. So the point was to use it as the Trojan horse to advance a range of policies and practices that they want. So the policies and practices that they want have been fairly clear. They are attacks on public education, defunding public schools, and ultimately moving to colleges and universities. This is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, when the attack first happened, there were many moderates and liberals who themselves have been uncomfortable with the extent to which anti-racism is a theme or a topic of conversation for K through 12. So a lot of folks were willing to sit on their hands or at least step back a little bit based on the worry that there may be limits that wokeness transcends in the way that young children will be introduced to these ideas. It didn't help that many apocryphal stories were circulated about how white children were being treated in classrooms. For the most part, the paper of record, the New York Times and others, responded to the attack on critical race theory, not with an interrogation of where the attack was coming from and what it was designed to do, but rather interrogating teachers and critical race theorists about what actually was going on in the classroom. So it made the mainstream media basically a weapon that could be utilized to advance this attack. And just to be clear, the ultimate goal is to defund public education so that vouchers and various other ways that money is spent on public education could be redistributed to what is seen as the white parents who should have more control about what's happening in their school systems. I couldn't resist sharing this. This is basically a way of connecting the rhetorics of the resistance to school desegregation in the 60s to the rhetorics that are playing out in America today. It's also important to recognize that although this has been framed by the media as a grassroots organic mobilization of parents, this is in fact a product of a deeply organized, well-resourced movement that has many different wings to it. I like to say they have a ministry of disinformation, they have research wings, they have activation wings, and yes, they have a militarized wing as well. This is an asymmetrical situation where, yes, there is truth to the fact that there is a war, but it is a one-sided war. There is a part of this mobilization that is not as yet mobilized. This just gives you a sense of how widespread it is, how effective it is. These are states that have actually enacted legislation against critical concepts. There are also states that have enacted it through attorney general reports, and also those who have enacted it through rulemaking at the state level. It has been introduced all across the country, anti-critical race theory measures. And actually now this map is even incorrect. 49 states have seen something that has been introduced. And a lot of people think that it's just a red state phenomenon. It is not. It is happening at local levels all over the country. I wanted to add this just to make it clear that the suppression of ideas and the suppression of political power in the United States are going hand in hand. These are many of the states that have enacted laws that make it difficult for racialized people to exercise political power, where the right to exercise power and the right to exercise the freedom to learn and to speak go hand in hand. We have a political system that many times is defined by terms that we all know about, but people are often afraid to use in the context of the United States. This just gives you a sense of what the language is that allows this to happen. So Florida precludes materials that make individuals feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish. So this is a subjective determination of what kind of materials can legitimately be taught in the classroom. Again, as I was saying, it starts with the idea that children need to be protected. This is now they're attempting to apply this to colleges and universities. Entire departments are being eliminated because of claims that it violates the anti-woke law. North Dakota, I thought, was also interesting because the way this law is framed, actual dimensions of American anti-discrimination law can't be taught. This is basically saying that any instruction that suggests that racism is anything more than individual bias or prejudice cannot be taught. We have an entire law called disparate impact theory that understands that discrimination can happen notwithstanding the absence of prejudice and bias. In North Dakota, one wonders how those laws can be taught. I said I was going to push back just a little bit on thinking about the consequences of calling this a culture war. Sometimes when we use the term the culture war, it's basically a matter of preferences. It's a matter of whose cultural norms will prevail. One doesn't get the sense that lives and livelihoods are at stake. So we always want to lift up teachers who have actually lost their jobs because they said things or taught things. Matthew Hahn lost his job because he taught an essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates on reparations, lost his job. Amy Donofrio lost her job because she had a Black Lives Matter project in her classroom. Her students were so successful that they were invited to the White House to meet Barack Obama. They came home to a destroyed classroom, and she has lost her job, and she has lost or is about to fight to be licensed to continue to teach. So we're talking not simply about culture, or to put it another way, if we're willing to call the Civil War a culture war, then yeah, maybe it is a culture war. If we're willing to talk about the resistance to school segregation as culture war, perhaps. But I think it doesn't really give us a sense of everything at stake. So I want to end with an example of why this is not just the metastasizing of a right-wing project, but it requires centrist appeasement in order for it to be as effective as it was. So one of the things that happened after 2020's mass mobilization about George Floyd's murder and also the killing of Breonna Taylor is that new demands for concepts for teaching about the history of race and racism and how it continued to shape life chances in American society led to new opportunities to promote a course called African American Advanced Placement. This course had been proposed years and years earlier, but there wasn't a demand for it. The corporation that's a nonprofit that is the gatekeeping corporation to higher education in the United States is called the College Board. The College Board assembled about 200 African American studies professionals to help now develop this course. There was great fanfare about this course, and it was initially a good opportunity for the College Board to make money. They are a $1.5 billion institution, so they're nonprofit. But their nonprofit status depends on a business model in which all the states, or as many states as they can, agree to teach their courses so that the students can take an advanced placement exam to get college credit. They make their money off of the exam. So for their purposes, to get as many states as possible to sign on to this course, well, that fits their business model. The problem is that the course ran into the buzzsaw called anti-wokeness. And Florida is the place, as Ron DeSantis says, that wokeness comes to die. So when they created the course, and they created the course based on the direction of all of these African-American studies professors, they said that among the most significant themes, the most common themes were intersectionality, were structural racism. Some of the most common topics were mass incarceration, structural racism, et cetera. Well, these were concepts that the Florida governor identified as deeply problematic concepts. So this is a chart of the things that they found unacceptable in the course and wanted them to be eliminated. Now, here's where the story gets very uncomfortable. What is the College Board supposed to do? So the College Board, and I'm trying to frame it as sympathetically as possible. They need to make money, or at least feel that they must make money. They want to take advantage of this opportunity. And Florida has said, you will not get this course taught if you have these ideas. So what the College Board eventually did was take out these concepts that Florida didn't like. So intersectionality was mentioned 26 times in the original core course. It got eliminated to 1, and that was optional. And you can see Black feminism, institutional racism. These were all ideas that were eliminated from the required curriculum and made optional by the course. I think the smoking gun is not so much the topics, but the objectives. Here you can see what the conflict really is between how Black studies was conceptualized by those who are in this field and how it was whittled away to fit within the objectives of Florida. Black studies is understood by those who do it as not simply Black history. It is bringing that history forward to the contemporary moment to understand the implications and to better equip those who are now literate about the implications of that history to engage in transformative work with future oriented reforms in mind. If you look at each of these objectives, there are efforts to effectively say, what we have is what we deserve and nothing more. So these are all efforts to eliminate the production of knowledge towards the betterment of society, particularly towards the betterment of racial equity and justice. So all of these things were taken out of the core curriculum. More equally importantly are some of the names: Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Kathy Cohen, and I sort of saw my stuff taken out too. Now, what is to be done and what is to be inferred from this? I will just tell you that the College Board itself said, Florida didn't make us do it. We did it because we thought that pedagogically it made sense to take this content out, to add more ancient content. So there's a lot of stuff about the ancient Kush in now the African-American Studies course. But also there was a comment that once these ideas have been so politicized, they're no longer educationally useful. So what that is telling us is that if the right wing in any context is successful at politicizing and misinforming and disinformation campaigns, they may be able to count on centrist institutions to bow to that disinformation and eliminate those concepts. Now, of course, who is making the decision about whether these ideas are useful? They certainly didn't talk to people all around the world who use these ideas regularly, not only in their academic work, but actually in organizing, in public policy, and in other concepts. So this was a decision made by an institution that was not responsive to or did not in any other way consult the wider community. I left this in just so we can be clear. This is not the first time this has happened. The Daughters of the Confederacy are an organization in the United States that decided that they were going to ultimately win the narrative war after the Civil War by controlling what people had access to learn. It has been so successful that at this point, less than 10% of American students of the high school age know that the Civil War was fought over slavery. So we are pretty much back to where we are. Some of the main advances that happened over the last couple of years, for example, bringing structural racism into public health so we can understand health disparities. That's now also targeted by the anti-woke cabal. Here's the last thing I'm going to say, and finally share a video with you. It is important to recognize that, of course, this is an intellectual and academic debate. It's also a democracy debate. It's important to draw the connections between this pushback and what happens to societies when a minority is able to take over, what can legitimately be discussed in public arenas, what can legitimately be taught, what can legitimately be said about American society. So we joined together with all the civil rights organizations, with teachers organizations, had a May 3rd day of activation through which our effort is to try to at least balance out the asymmetry. When one side is so completely organized and the other side isn't, the only guarantee is that you cannot win. So I'm gonna end with this. It is, hopefully, if I can play it for you, it's a video called The Freedom to Learn.
Reading, writing, and literacy are pillars of the human experience. The idea that people are trying to ban books in ranges. When I was in the 9th grade, I was transformed by reading Toni Morrison's The Budasz. When I was 13 years old, I read Color Purple by Alice Walker, and the experience changed me forever. Enise by T.S.A. Lehman. It's a book that's being targeted for removal in this unprecedented wave of book bans that we're seeing happening across the country right now.
Als Rüstetat Blackliste Apprentice, a lot of cases Blacklist integration. These are some of the ideas of how to students to expand.
I first encountered the concept of intersectionality when I was a graduate student after reading Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins. Learning about intersectionality allowed me to analyze and act on the multiple structures that produce racialized sexual harassment. The state of Florida wants to expunge the powerful tool and concept of intersectionality from the AP African American Studies course.
In the 10th grade, I read a separate piece by John Knowles. It's a total coming of age experience for me. And this feeling of connection removed my feelings of unworthiness, shame, and self-hatred. States are hoping to disappear this book now due to its homosexual aids.
But a lot of the reasons that some think that it shouldn't be read by young people are the reasons that I think young people should go out and get this book.
So a young person once wrote, if you are silent about your pain, don't even say you enjoyed it. So that is why I'm speaking up, and that is why I ask you to speak up as well.
Maya told the truth about childhood sexual abuse by doing so. Read the multitudes to be the same.
Books save lives.
This is why we cannot ban. I know why. Cage word saying.
So a young persons, their eyes will watch down. Feminist theory from margin to center. Books like this, stories like this, ought to be taught.
We cannot allow bad extremists to determine what authors we can read and what concepts we can study.
We must demand the freedom to learn.
Thank you so much, Kim, for this amazing talk and so fascinating. So now for the second part of the workshop, the idea is we're going to have a bunch of actually small intervention from discussants before opening the floor to questions from the audience. So we decided to group this intervention by theme. The first theme is going to be on academic knowledge and academic knowledge production. The second theme is going to be on the role of the university, and the third one on the experience and struggle of people of color. So for the first team, I will start with Angelica. I will ask discussants to present themselves and introduce themselves. I think that's the best.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank you, the EUI Decolonising Initiative, for organizing such a space, such an event, because these are really important spaces. And thank you so much, Professor Crenshaw, for such an inspiring talk. Thinking about it, I was thinking that this war that we are talking about is also a war towards words, a war against certain knowledges. And for a long time, I didn't have words to put names to my experiences because I didn't have these knowledges. I was growing up as a Black child in a white world in the 1980s, and I often felt a sense of discomfort inhabiting an overtly visible Black body. The invisibility of whiteness, or the privilege of being seen, of seeing without being seen, was an attribute afforded to my peers, but not to me, because I was always visible. And from a very young age, I noticed how my interlocutors had a knowledge of me and my body without me speaking. So these experiences located me in a position that I call of epistemological discomfort. In my journey towards adulthood, I started to wonder why I knew what I knew and why I didn't know, why I was not taught certain knowledges that I could hear, I could smell, I could taste at home, but not in the white world where I was raised. And at the same time, in my daily life, I was confronted with a rigid and powerful archive with a capital A, in which these stories, certain stories, didn't appear. These stories were absent, and so was I. So finding myself in this location of discomfort and understanding how certain experiences, including my own, have been systematically suppressed, I felt a sense of urgency. So the urgency to write, to trace, to listen to these stories. So the stories that I would have loved to read, but I couldn't. And so through academia, through knowledge, I tried to give a sense to this gap and to this emptiness that I have. And I realized, for example, reading Michel Foucault, how certain knowledges have become marginalized and subjugated and considered, as he said, inadequate to their task, insufficiently elaborated, naive, located low down on the hierarchy beneath the required level of cognition or scientificity. And in this situation, in the case of Italy, for example, colonialism played an important role, but mainstream historiography has perpetuated an idea of romanticized Italian colonialism, devoid of racism, not interest in economic gain, perfectly embodied in the myth, as we all know, Italiani, brava gente, Italian good-hearted people. And we can see we still have a problem of memory in this country. Just today I was tweeting because it was so enraging to see this funerali di Stato. So we have a serious problem of memory if this is how we deal with this event, but this is another story. I realized that I was part of a pulsating archive of bodies intimately connected to the history of Italian colonialism. And so if the archive, this system of mainstream knowledge can be considered a materialized locus of power in which whiteness has been historically institutionalized and maintained, I decided to orient my attention, to orient my gaze towards pulsating, epidermic and carnal counter-archive of bodies, marked and scarred by the history of colonialism and whiteness, both bodies who hold scars, wounds and traumas, but also stories. And these stories help us to conceptualize alternative ways of knowing and further to find powerful words to fight against this attempt of silencing. So these stories not only generate new and powerful knowledges on the construction of race and identity, for example, here in Italy, but they also constitute a powerful counter-body archive, able to challenge visions of Italian colonialism, devoid of racism, for example. So they help us to find alternative ways of knowing and to develop words, new words that we can help to fight against this war. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. Can you just introduce yourself?
Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Angelica Pesarini, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, and I work in the Department of Italian Studies and the Center for Diaspora and Transnational Studies, but I'm a friend of the EUI because I was working at NYU, that is just behind the corner, for 5 years. Thank you.
So we're going to continue with Daphné.
I already introduced myself, so I don't think I need to. Should I still? Okay. Gildelen Aty-Biyo, first year researcher here in the law department of EUI. And I would just start by saying that I'm French, so I partly grew up in France. And when I was doing my master's degree, my law degree in Paris, in 2021, and I was thinking about going into academia, there was this whole discourse and debate against wokeism and Islamo-gauchism, Islamo-leftism, and the danger of it in universities. And I really felt it's strange because I was interested in critical theory and in decolonial methods. And then I asked myself, do I have a place in these spaces? Because there's such an opposition, and it was not just an opposition against certain knowledges, but against the people who were producing it. Because at the time, it was after, in 2020, when George Floyd died in 2020, there were lots of talks in France against, reporting it with what happened in France with police violence and with Adama Traoré's death. And there was a big protest, one of the biggest protests in Paris in 2020, and it made the news. And there was a discomfort because I'm not the only one who said that, but sociologists like Kauta Archi, Eric Fassin, historians like Mabula Sauro or Mam Fatou Nyang all analyze it as a danger because for once, knowledge was moving. For a long time, people of color, people of migrant descent in France were objects of knowledge. So you have these researchers who were white going into the suburbs or going to talk about them, and they were deemed as objective. But all of a sudden, with the massification of university, lots of these migrant communities were able to access university and were able to become academics. And all of a sudden, what they were doing was deemed as too subjective. So they were becoming subjects of knowledge, producing knowledge and interrogating the positionality of people who were doing the research. And now it was deemed as being too subjective, not being objective, because I analyze it as, once again, to what Professor Crenshaw said, the fact that now we were being visible and we had a voice and political power, claiming that we had something to say and disturbing the balance. So all these attacks were our way to silence us and to keep the status quo in the way it is. And as a researcher, as a Black woman researching on colonial histories of property, for example, I always find it hard to keep a balance between saying to myself, I produce scientific knowledge. So I have, of course, to engage in academic debates and to justify my methodologies, but when is it too far? When is it that I am being questioned because of my body? Because when I enter in the space, I am read as this white Black woman, so I cannot be objective, right? But if my colleague who does the same, who's a white man, is not read as the same way, then the positionality and my body speaks in a way, and I find myself over-justifying myself. And yeah, I would say it's a very complicated balance to find between, of course, we're in academia, we have to engage in discussions, but when is it too far? When is it becoming an attack on itself, on ourselves? And when can we even do such research in the university? I find myself becoming more and more analytical and just asking myself if the university can be decolonized, and if we can really do it at university, and if the terms of the debate are not already flawed and methodologies are not already skewed against us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daphné. So last on the topic, we're going to have Fartun online. Yes, if you can please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing event. And I feel sorry not being in Florence. I'm online, but yeah, I feel sorry. I'm Fartun Mohamed. I'm a third year and PhD student at the EUI in History Department. And yes, I'm the first Black Italian in the History Department at the EUI. So this, I think this says a lot about the Italian situation. And my core was 2020. So thank you for giving this such amazing speech for Professor. So it's very important that this presentation is not only important, not only for me, but many of us at the EUI are not and beyond the EUI. It's remarkable to reflect the fact that when I started in 2020 at the EUI, even thinking about this kind of events and this kind of opportunity was something realistically possible. So this is understand the necessary and value of our work and our presence. Our even is temporary at the EUI, but not, that doesn't mean it's not important. It's very, very important. And this event is just the topic and the situation, the way in which we start to change our institution. So today I would like to focus on the Italian situation, just Angelica mentioned before, because it's very important for me to know and to have a feedback about this situation from the professor. So in particular, with recording the Italian, the study of colonialism and racism. In Italy, academia, colonial history is often neglected, and it's approached with unnecessary caution. So the colonial past remains subject like denial or amnesia, just Angelica says before. The colonial study is mainly studies by white men and Italians. So this is one important thing. But yeah, this national history, the Italian colonialism history, is more precisely this white history, national white history, national Italian history. And it's predominantly scholars are white men. This monochromatic presence of history inevitably produces a limit on a singular narrative. This narrative often silences those who are not part of the dominant group, those who might provide an alternative point of view. This was the case until a few years ago, but now we are facing a new scenario with more diverse voices, more not white people, not white intellectual working on Italian colonialism and racism, like Angelica, like Magda, like me, and so on and so forth. However, this emerging presence in Italian academia scenario on less silence but complex struggle. Non-white researchers often find themselves struggle to find a space within in academia. Good example, Angelica is right now is in Toronto, and she went in EUI, not Italian academia. This is good example, for example. To find ourselves in trouble is paradox. However, we use critical anti-colonial, anti-racism theory. We encourage criticism and sorry for this noisy, and are often told that those theories are not sustainable for Italian context, given the particular nature and so on and so forth. We also reflect on my personal experience as Black Italian researcher in this field. I often find myself to be the only Black person in the conference or in the academia where we are talking about colonialism or racism. And particular circumstances this often leads to a situation where my racial identity is perceived beyond and before my academic experience, and those marginalizing my contribution. This leads me to wonder and ask, how can we ensure that those critical and Black theories can be used beyond the context in which they were originally developed? Or rather, it's appropriate to use them, considering that this issue will often have more common elements than their differences. Understanding those kind of debate is very important for us, because in Italy, we don't have long history in critical race theory or Black history or Black studies. And we even not be able to think about right now how we can produce a new perspective like a Black Italian, because it's something very recently. We need more time to find our space, our voice in large academia issues. So this is my my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Fartun. So
now I will give back the mic to Kim if you want a few minutes. It's a lot, so I'm not expecting you to react on everything, but just so on this topic of knowledge production, a few words, then we'll move for a second round of discussions.
Well, so I don't want to take up any more time. I'm really excited to hear about the other vectors of this presence. I guess the only thing that does come to mind is that the irony, I guess, of there being a global conversation about too much when we're in a period where people are still like the first. And the ability to sustain a plausible claim that the new work is doing the racializing and the absence of the work is not itself a racial project is just astonishing to me. So it's simply the fact that racial work is being done in our absence. It's not that the racial work starts when we show up. It's the ability to interrogate that racial work that was done in our absence that is basically what the project is. But anyway, I'm really enjoying this. So.
Thank you. So we're going to go for a second round of interventions. And the second one's going to be on the role of the university. And I'm going to start myself. So I'm Daphné. I'm a fifth-year history researcher at the EUI. I'm working on colonial history in British East Africa, looking at interracial sexuality, the definition of gender and racial boundaries in colonial context. So yeah, I would like to address 2 points on the role of university, which are institutional resistance and performative allyship. And I'm gonna start with telling you a bit about my personal journey in the academia, but more specifically here because I've been here for 5 years. And in these 5 years, I invested lots of time and energy in this kind of decolonizing project, or all this side project, probably more time on this than on my own research. So the idea was like, yeah, we want to get some discussion on racial justice, on colonial continuity. So we founded the Decolonizing Initiative a couple of years ago. We also started to do a Black History Month event here to question of epistemologies, but also to invite Black scholars that are not invited usually at the EUI. So first, when I started to do that, and I was not alone, obviously, like Fartun also has been really involved in this, is that I just had the impression that there was a lack of interest, people, like, it's not their fight, Once I remember received an email because we have this distribution list for the Decolonizing Initiative, and people can unsubscribe because as all like distribution lists from universities, and usually people just say unsubscribe, and someone reply, not my research interest, please unsubscribe. I was like, this is not your research interest, this is not your political interest. So, but I find it funny how people just frame it in that way. It's not my research interest, but it's not about research, it's about politics. So I know like the EUI as being a really white institution has there is a little racial awareness, there is a little politicization, there is a lot of, colorblindness, all this thing, and that's nothing new. But the engagement was really low. But then after a couple of years, I started to understand that it's not just about lack of interest of engagement, it's about some institutional resistance as well. But it took me some time to understand, because of course, we're free to organize this kind of event, to have this discussion. I'm also aware of my privilege as being highly educated in this kind of institution. But what's for me, institutional resistance is very subtle, because it's not like the direct attack on knowledge, or, people mixing opinions with racism, or white supremacist trolling, or this kind of thing. This also happened, but it's more about, the little thing that at some point you started to understand that it is resistant. It's not lack of support. And to give you an example, I think that the way I experienced it the most was about being ignored or silenced. So because I'm a researcher, so we relied all these initiatives that researcher led. So we relied on the administration or faculty members, this kind of thing. And it's really easy for them not to reply to an email when we ask for funding, or when we ask for an authorization for Black History Month. We wanted to hang out some posters, and they just, they don't say no, they just don't reply. But then you insist, and then, you got this kind of I'm sorry, I haven't seen your email, or I've been busy, or oh no, it's too late now, I'm sorry, this kind of thing. And I'm like, once it's happening more than once, then you understand it's not there is a kind of lack of interest, but it's actually some resistance, there is actually a pushback, which is pretty subtle. And also you can't call it out, because how to prove it? People will say, no, but there's nothing to prove. It's how are you trying to prove microaggression? How do you prove it? It's about this, but you can't, you can't prove it. So that's one thing, is this institutional resistance. And then the other thing that actually that can be combined sometimes is performative allyship. So at the same time that having somebody who hasn't replied for your email for weeks, saying oh, I'm so sorry, I've been busy, I was not able to help, or it's too complicated, it's too late, there is no money. Then they say, but thank for your work. It's very important. If you want, I can share it with my network. Yeah, but the work is done already. So it's so there is also this kind of sense that people think they support, but actually they don't. And when the work is done, and it can also go to the worst, which is appropriation. But it's not actually allyship, because allyship is something else. So, sorry, this is a bit long, but so my personal journey in this institution has been about this. And at the end, maybe so it created this maybe feeling of helplessness, but it also made me question the purpose and the meaning of the fight. Because what can we actually expect from university? So on the question of the role of the university, is it the place to fight? Can we actually, taking the EUI as a white liberal institution, but also white and male dominated space, can we go beyond the performative allyship? Can we expect more than this? And so so I just like to finish. Starting to think about, is the fight within the institution really like the right fight to be fought, in the sense that, of course, we need to fight for critical knowledge. Of course, we need to fight for being able to teach and to research some topic. But do we have to play by the rule? Do we need to get like critical knowledge approved and legitimate from institutions that are not, self-critical about their own contradictions? So is it not like the fight for racial justice in the real world, let's say, like, I know this is also the real world, but I mean, outside of the academia, is more urgent somehow, because as you said at the end of your presentation, that because it's not about culture, it's impacting people's lives. Some people are dying. And so because of my own privilege as being part of this academia, should not we focus our privilege and use them to fight the actual fight, and not maybe trying to deal with a white liberal academia? So Seyda.
Hello. Okay. I am Enise Seyda Kapusuz. I'm a fifth-year researcher here in the history department, and my research is focused on the history of feminism and the history of photography. It's a combination of both histories in the late Ottoman Empire. And I'm a member of Decolonizing Initiative, and I am a member of the EUI Queer and Feminist Studies Working Group. First of all, thank you all for organizing this. It's always a big pleasure to see these kind of events are taking place at EUI. It's the same for me. When I started my PhD at EUI 5 years ago, I could never imagine that we will organize this kind of events then. So I have tears basically in my eyes. And also thank you for the talk. It's really inspiring, and it also let me think about a lot the challenges of fighting against the oppressive structures and white supremacy. As an academic who is in a volunteer political exile, and who continues her academic and political work in the diaspora. And I prepared 2 questions related to how to fight against sexual harassment and the police violence in the university. So the first question is how to apply feminist strategies such as partiality and transformative justice to combat sexual harassment and sexual violence in the neoliberal university, while in the radically self-organized communities, the cases of harassment when the cis male perpetrator belongs to a marginalized group and the cis female survivor has a white or whiter identity, often the unequal power dynamics between genders are dismissed, and partiality and solidarity are constructed in favor of the oppressed identity of the cis male perpetrator. I hope it's clear. And my second question is inspired by a case of police violence that happened recently at EUI at the beginning of May. During the State of Union event, which is a highly problematic event from an anti-nationalist, anti-capitalist, anti-militarist, and pro-environmentalist perspective, organized by the EUI annually, some of our friends and colleagues were exposed to racial profiling and police harassment. Since then, there were many discussions against the police existence on the campus among the EUI community. And as far as I follow the discussions about the topic, I see that the statement, "There is no place for the police at the university," is the most popular statement. However, from my perspective, the statement, "There is no place for the police at the university," has a potential danger of elitism and the isolation of the university from the public in the age of neoliberalism, where the autonomy of the university is not provided by the will of people or any kind of social movement. Instead, the university is a place where the patriarchal, nationalist, racist, and the militarist discourses and capitalist forms of relations are produced. Keeping my claim in our mind, I would like to ask you how to combat police violence and police as an institution, as academics who are ordinary people with precarious jobs or who could be illegalized individuals, and how to go beyond the statement there is no place for the police at the university and contribute to the abolishment of the police campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and Raghavi.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Crenshaw, for your presentation, and to all the discussants for your really moving interventions. They've given me a lot to ruminate about, which I think I'm doing as I speak. So apologies if this is all really scattered. But in my intervention, I wanted to speak about the notion of anger and the role and the relationship that universities have with anger. I must first acknowledge that I hold a fair bit of privilege in my home country, which happens to be India, on account of my caste, also on account of my religion. And it is only after I moved to Europe that I started to experience racist aggressions. And my first response to these aggressions was anger. Anger both at the racism, but as I started to experience them more and more, also anger at my own complicity, at the simultaneous racism that people like me, people like my family members perpetrate against others who are more disadvantaged or more racialized than us. Anger at my own inability to produce any sort of change in this institution that I'm currently situated in. And also anger at my helplessness, the fact that I was not able to give a vocabulary to what I was feeling. I was just able to call it anger. And as I started to engage in more anti-racist work here, I was often treated to questions such as, do you think decolonizing loses its credibility because people of color are so angry about it? Or do you think you end up antagonizing your potential white allies because of your angry tone? And all of which were clearly trying to police my behavior, trying to make me think that you can only do scientific work, which is decolonizing, if you are unmoved in some ways. And notwithstanding where such remarks come from, which is a whole other debate, I think the commonplaceness of such remarks calls for some scrutiny. Just understanding how white institutions frame the rage of racialized peoples. And I feel like neoliberal universities, white institutions, almost pride themselves now on being rational, as on being alien or removed from emotions, affect, therefore also anger. And they create a culture where instead of being challenged, rightfully challenged by anger, these institutions start to treat the emotions of anti-racist work with suspicion and fear, almost to say that anger is now going to disrupt the democracy that holds these institutions together. And it pushes people who do anti-racist work to the fringes. It pushes them to a space where they feel ashamed of feeling angry. And at the same time, if you peel the layer in which this rhetoric operates a little more, in a very ironic way, the same university, the same white institution, as Sara Ahmed also says really brilliantly, uses affect. It uses the emotion of fear, the collective emotion of fear, in silencing the rage of someone who's trying to do anti-racist work. To sort of say that together we fear, and fear is what brings us together. And that is very much an affective strategy. And it's funny how one affective strategy is being used to silence another affective outlet. And something I was wondering was, how can we, when we're all situated in a university and trying to do anti-racist work, how can we channel this anger in more productive ways? Not to think of anger and affect as emotional excesses that must be shed, but as productive ways of seeing the world in which the university is set. And here, of course, I'm instantly reminded of the spectacular work of Audre Lorde, who foregrounds discomfort, rage, dissonance, who foregrounds the fact that we all inhabit, at the same time, we inhabit different spaces within the universities. Lorde teaches us that anger is an appropriate reaction. It is in fact an essential tool for honest communication and in order to dismantle structures of oppression. I'm also thinking here of the work of Meisha Cherry, who calls it Lordian anger. She says, anger is not let's try and think about what anger is calling for. It's not calling for the destruction of the good, if there is a good in education. It's not calling for the elimination of anyone else in the name of virtue signaling. It's actually calling for change in racist beliefs, in expectations, policies, behaviors. And perhaps if we channelize this, think about how we can channelize anger in a productive way, we can also come to see that some types of anger are felt by some people most easily. And these are people who find themselves at the intersection of various forms of inequality: gender, economic ability, people who identify as queer, people who identify as people of color. And in this university setting, if we are overworked, or if we are underpaid, or if we are frustrated, and this frustration comes out as anger, it's not a pathological condition or an individual condition. It is because of the structures. These structures thrive precisely because of the fact that they're able to frustrate us or anger us. And it is important to start seeing anger not as an individual reaction, but as an appropriate reaction to oppressive structures. So what I wanted to ask was how you engage with your own anger when you situate yourself in a university space. And not just in the politics of universities, but also in your teaching. Are there ways in which we can invite anger as a response to readings? Are there ways in which we can invite anger in spaces like this, where we are all able to share our anxieties of navigating white spaces? Are there ways in which we can invite anger in writing? Not think about writing as something that should be neutral or listless, but writing as something that should have these affective, that should be loaded with affect, that should be loaded with anger. And unfortunately, I don't have responses, but I'm hopeful that maybe you do.
Thank you so much. Do you want to say a few words? Then we will have 2 more short interventions, but in between, please, if you just want to say something on the university.
All right, this was a nice surprise. I didn't know we were going to be going here. Let me start with where you started about is it worth it for us to be investing our intellect, our bodies, our spirit in places like this? Should we be, prioritizing somewhere else, something else? I want to suggest that the story that I shared earlier is a story that partially has an answer to this. First of all, I think that the very fact that there are so many resources being deployed to try to push knowledge production, push us out of knowledge production, should be telling us that there is something deeply valuable about these wars that we are having, right? People don't fight about things that are valueless. They don't try to push us out. If there wasn't a value, a point of actually being able to lay claim to institutions like these, challenging some of the rationalizations, the practices, the habits of thought and erasure that make our condition appear to be natural, just there, and unchangeable. So I'm a big advocate for the idea that power takes place in institutions like these in ways that parallel, rationalize, and make legible power that takes place in other arenas. So I see the university as part and parcel of the colonial project, part and parcel of white supremacy, part and parcel of patriarchy. I see us as assets to our various communities. So communities need capital, but they also need intellectual capital as well. These are both the reasons why the fight has been so longstanding. It's also the reason why when we begin losing in other places, we lose here, and vice versa. I want to suggest that we take as cautionary tales the fact that even in places that have ratified, and by ratified, I mean institutions that have ethnic studies, institutions that have, you know, critical race theory programs, even in those places, it's never secure, which is telling us that the battle is ongoing, right? And it's real. The question about police in the university, I also think is really interesting. I don't think I have anything particularly smart to say about that doesn't in some ways build on what I just said. The idea that the role of the police here, or that this should be a police-free state where other places are not, does create a kind of questionable hierarchy. And I think it's right to challenge what are the implications of that. And at the same time, I think that, I did get the email from, the president about what happened here. I felt like an interloper a little bit. It was like, ooh, should I be reading this? But then I was shocked, to see this. And I do want us to always, I don't want to give up the idea that police and ideas together are toxic in a way that we need to consistently be worried about. We all come from histories in which policing ideas has been the cornerstone of deeply repressive regimes. And I want to hold on to that, while at the same time, I want to hold on to being able to critique the places where policing shows up outside and the work that does. I think we can have two conversations at the same time without necessarily giving into, the hierarchies. On anger, it's interesting. There are two questions that I've gotten more lately that reveal the extent to which my generation has had to acclimate to conditions that new generations are able to read and challenge much more. The other question I get a lot is, what's your self-care strategy? It's almost kind of the same question, but in a different way. And when I first started getting it, I was like, what? I didn't even know how to begin to answer it. And I was taken with the fact that self-care comes into a conversation about how we think about various forms of subordination and disempowerment. And it's like, but I'm giving a critique right now. What are you talking about? And it was important to be able to identify the right to self-regard, the right to placing one's body and subjectivity into the conversation, and being able to identify the harm that might exist by not thinking that we have a right to ask these questions. So the anger is another one, of those. And I, as you were talking, I was thinking about all of the times that I have to go through and edit out the word that, really delivers more of what I really am trying to say. So recognizing from people who edit me, you might put it this way to get the message across more. So the self-editing is real. I recognize it. I hear it. And at the same time, I was also thinking, again, looking at some of these pictures, who gets managed, whose anger gets managed is also a product of power. It's not just anger per se, it's anger in the voices of those of us who are marginalized, because the war on wokeness is nothing but a mobilization of anger, a legitimation of anger, anger of the displacement, anger of the who are you people, anger at who gave you the authority to decide. So I'm thinking at minimum for people like me, the ability to read out and to call out when we are told that our anger gets in the way, and then a willingness and the ability of our colleagues in society at large to say, well, if they're angry, and by there, I mean the people who are used to being in control, we've got a problem. When they're angry, that's telling us something is amiss. I mean, that's what has been going on in the United States for at least the last 10 years, right? The loss of, the white working class has been framed as, this is telling us that identity politics has gone too far. It's telling us blah, blah, blah. Whereas our anger has never been used quite for those purposes. So I think being able to read that, at least for me, is something that is valuable. I'll end with this, and I was torn about whether I should say this, and what the heck, because it's coming back a little bit to the fact that we're here. This is not the first time I've been here. I was here some time ago, and our role as visitors is to come and sort of sprinkle about, be present in different conversations and blah, blah, blah. So I took it very seriously that I should do that. And I was told that there was an interesting conference on migration that I might want to go to. Obviously, migration, race are kind of connected, here especially. So I thought I might be able to go and learn something and contribute to something. So I think it was here somewhere. It's not easy to get around EUI. You got to kind of know where you're going. You don't just kind of wander into any of these institutions, right? But I had the place and went up the big stairs and opened up a big room, and people were there, having a conference. So I, sort of joined in like a conferee. And lunch happened after this conference. And I noticed that I was having a hard time, getting anybody's eye or anyone talking to me. So I'm like, okay, I'm new. I was the only person of visible, non-white lineage in that room. Okay, I'm in Europe. I'm not totally surprised about this. I go to get my plate, and I'm putting some food in the plate. And at some point, a porter comes and does like this to me and tries to grab my plate from me. And so we're having this sort of tug of war over lunch, like with him doing like this and me going, what are you doing? So I finally, win the battle over the plate. And sit down at the table to engage in luncheon conversation with people, and no one will talk to me. So clearly in this moment, I'm an interloper. There's conversation going on, and then it is revealed that the organizer of the conference did not know who I was and had no understanding why I was there, and thought that I'd kind of wandered in, from the street somewhere. What was fascinating to me, and I say this because I do wonder what happened to my anger at that moment, right? Because the conversation then proceeded with, we didn't know who you were, which was the first response. And the second, it's not what you think it is. And at that point, it became kind of a game. So tell me what you think I think it was. And so it kind of, proceeded that way for a while. And it became a thing, and people talked about it and blah, blah, da. So was I angry at that moment? I think my anger has so long been repackaged as, now comes the moment of performing, rational. Why would you think I would have just come off the street to come up to have me, trying to walk people through where race got in the way of common sense, and kind of recognizing, I think, that had I fully performed righteous indignation about this, that it would have been a moment that the whole thing would have been written off. There would not have been, what do they call the educational moment? Now, even as I say that, sometimes I think maybe that educational moment should be marked by getting a little glimpse of what was going on inside, a little glimpse of you need to think twice before you go and try to take a plate away from somebody. But I think that there is an awareness, a recognition that part of being disempowered as a people is that you must navigate those moments very carefully. We can analyze power, but that doesn't always mean we can escape it. And understanding when you might be able to escape and when you can't, I think that is the key to figuring out how much real estate in these places we are able to grasp, hold on to, and pass on to the next generation.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I don't know if we have yeah, and actually it's making the perfect connection to the last two interventions from Lulu first and then Khalil online. So Lulu, I'll let you present yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for everything you said. I'm Lulu Badr. I just defended my PhD here. Thank you, thank you. It's very nice to celebrate with everyone. It was a difficult journey. But it flows directly from what you were saying just now, actually, on self-editing, self-censorship, the burden of proof that has to fall on us, unfortunately. You know, I with this conference, I was thinking, my sort of academic work works on intellectuals in the Arab world, but I was trying to really gather some insights from my own personal experience, and not necessarily here, but in different European countries that I've lived and studied in. And I realized that self-censorship was truly a common theme. And this is how I managed my emotions. This is how I sort of presented myself in different ways. I mean, it takes a lot of mental agility and emotional intelligence to be able to read a room and see what kind of words can come out and how they will fall on listeners' ears. So it's sort of like preventative medicine in a way. And I think that's sort of a less explored space, I feel, because you can't really prove what is not there. And you have to trust the person in front of you enough to tell you, I didn't manage to say this, I really wanted to, and trust them that this is relevant and this is important to them. And the application of this happens in two ways, I noticed. It's first of all discursive or narrative, but also aesthetic. And with aesthetic, it was really interesting. For example, it showed in the way, in my presence, in spaces that are not usually very common where I am, like a Bon Iver concert, for example. Truly, these spaces where people are sort of have these question marks, but also like moments of, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Like, oh, this is so nice. And either way, it's interesting for me to understand my positionality. It also shows up in sort of references to cultural references or languages that I speak, etc. And people are sort of happy or sort of disquieted a bit. And that's interesting. But in the narrative sense, I really honed the skill. I'm not sure all of us did. That's what it's very heartwarming to recognize each other in all of our sort of interventions, but also heartbreaking in a sense. So I sort of honed the skill of translation. And it comes from exactly at the heart of intersectionality, because as you know, I have this different identities. Within me, I am a visibly brown woman, but I'm also a visibly Muslim woman. And often these two, I've noticed there's a hierarchy within these two, even within myself. And that took me years to realize. This is all very intimate, by the way, but I trust you all. Yeah, right? And I realized that being brown, being of color, is perceived as it's not a choice. You know, I'm kind of born this way, it's all good. But being visibly Muslim is a choice and perceived as the wrong one. And once I realized this, I was like, oh, so I could easily expand as a sort of and take place as a brown woman, but much less so as a Muslim woman. And so example of translations between these different vocabularies are, for example, you know,
I very happily pray, but maybe I would say that, oh, I meditate very often, or like, I'm very spiritual as opposed to religious. Or for example, I'm vegetarian as opposed to, I prefer halal food. And somehow I know immediately what kind of crowd I get to say what to, for example. And and I remember when we met with Daphné the first time, immediately you know that, oh, some things I can say that she will understand. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just recognizing that the person in front of you, on a personal level also, I'm not talking about academia or like this is completely different power dynamics, but even on a personal level, it's very difficult to sort of explain yourself every single time. And that translation cuts across all of these references. And I immediately recognize, oh, you operate in this vocabulary. And so I will place myself within that. And I'm very happy to do it. It works brilliantly. But I think that sort of takes its toll long term. And what you were mentioning, Professor Crenshaw, about different languages and how we can develop these vocabularies and move seamlessly within them. I think that's, it's paramount in order to inhabit these different spaces. And so my question is, how can we create work that takes into account these internal dynamics, sort of to record these scholarship of silence, if we can say. That's sort of one question. The other question is, I'm Egyptian. I grew up in Egypt. I'm in no way sort of a European citizen. And so for me, this is the public sphere. My private sphere is my family on the phone in Cairo. I mean, I go back for the summers and I'm very happy there. But and I wonder how that translates for citizens of Europe, who for them, they have to inhabit public and private sphere and move seamlessly between these two, not only at home or in the street, but also between their culture and the dominant sort of culture they inhabit. And what I noticed is that, and these culture wars are so important to have in not only in the Western world, but I realized that these sort of conflicts and these structures of power are imported in a local context. So in the Arab world, I see these questions of racism, not questions of racism, just racism, and the way it is structured is imported in exactly the same ways within my own communities. And it's so sad to talk about, and this is like airing dirty laundry, It's like, no, our communities are not even better. But in a sense, if the same vocabularies that started here are this Islamophobia, it now is seen in the Middle East as sort of, it's more common, to have spaces where veiled women cannot enter. And for me, that's insane. Like, I have more freedom in Copenhagen than in Cairo, just because they equate sort of religiosity with lack of rationality and all of these debates that we find here, but are imported in a packaged way in our local cultures. And that's why these wars sort of to be fought on this front here are incredibly important, because privilege sort of transcends these boundaries. And that's why it's, it's a problem. I wonder if you have any insights to that. Thank you.
So
last but not least, Khalil, are you online? Yes. Amazing.
Hi. Yeah, I wrote something that was probably far too long, so I'm going to sort of just breeze through it. But at first, obviously, I want to thank everybody. And Professor Crenshaw, it's like ridiculous honor to be able to be at a place where you are and hear you speak. I'm like several hundred miles away from you right now, and I'm kicking myself about the flights that I bought. The DI and Raghavi and Daphné and Gildelen, thank you so much for inviting me to even speak. So I'm Khalil. I'm a third-year history department researcher. I'm researching queer and more importantly, other fugitive or illegible erotics, sexualities and encounters within Black social spaces in Newark, New Jersey and Liverpool in the UK between the late 60s and the late 1990s. I'm American by birth. I've lived in the UK for just under 20 years. I'm speaking really quickly. I'm super self-conscious about that. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm a masculine presenting cis man. You know, most of the time English is my first learned language, and I'm able-bodied. So I just want to sort of like begin by acknowledging those characteristics and their very complicated value, like within this institution. So I think not unlike, and perhaps leading on from exactly issues of anger, confusion, and translation that I've like mentioned before, what I'd like to talk about is alienation. But I don't necessarily mean alienation from pedagogical modes and methods that permeate our disciplines and our practices, no matter how desperate and ardent our attempts to queer them are, or alienation from academia in some as a space or an apparatus. I'd like to talk about alienation from each other as researchers of color at EUI, and how that can actually function within collective decolonial and anti-white supremacy practices here and elsewhere. So I'm just going to briefly go over these two experiences as a kind of introduction to this and a kind of framing. Don't want to dwell on them, don't want to relitigate them, whatever they happened, here they are. So in the first incident, this white member of faculty referred to a very personal conversation that I had had with him a year before. This was in front of an all-white group of peers. It was something I'd said in confidence, and other peers confirmed to me what I felt, which was that this was something that was wildly inappropriate and also very oddly loaded. In the second, a white member of faculty invoked the dynamics and language of slavery and its abolition to sort of giddily joke about my attachment to critical Black and queer theory as contexts for thinking about my research impulses and my methodology. And this was met with complete silence from every other witness. Of course, everybody there was white. I feel like at best, these were sort of insensitive, clumsy utterances from somebody who's genuinely interested in helping me to move my project forward. At worst, they were the kind of, you know, dog whistly, microaggressive flexes that were made under the veil of scholarly discussion in an environment such as the one where we are, where certain coded gestures might go unnoticed. I didn't report these incidents. I didn't want to have to try and explain to someone who doesn't know me, who doesn't know America, in some office in Italy about what it means when a Black person in an otherwise white room is the only person who's described as articulate. Or when a slip of the tongue very subtly sort of like plants the seed of diversity higher into your peers' impression of you. Or what it means when it's suggested that you might not really have the proper credentials to be where you are. And I wasn't surprised that they happened at all, because I know where I am. And as a middle-aged Black person, I've been committing to work while negotiating multiple alienations for most of my life. But I want to focus on this other form of alienation that I mentioned, and it was necessary to kind of like talk about these events as a way to get to this. So following what was a really strong and vital period of bonding over experiences of racism at EUI with my peers of color, what struck me was how after these events, my distinction as, you know, Black and American, but also Black but American, was sort of re-reflected to me with really, really shocking clarity. And this happened in a way that was very much a gentle, but like firm address to a kind of like Pan-Africanist longing that I kind of like came here with in this very international environment. And one of the results of this in the short term was a kind of loving alienation from the Black community here, which I'll explain. Like I obviously have friends and peers here of diverse Black African and Black European backgrounds, and we gossip and we challenge each other, we support each other. But in talking about these events, something felt really incomplete. Their reactions never quite matched like the completely appalled pitch of my Black British and Black American family and friends teaching in universities, or like my white American husband who also teaches at a university in the States. And this produced in me a kind of ambivalence, feeling like both a part of and apart from the community of color at EUI. So obviously sort of like, you know, clearly joined in the awareness of race as an issue, but also unsettled by and kind of curious about the distances that became manifest in our communal catharsis at times. And of course, like I'm like, whatever, I'm an American idiot. So sometimes obviously I struggle to feel with the sensitivities of other Black researchers here with whom I don't share sort of like a common tongue or culture of origin. And so I wonder in a way if this feeling of sometime alienation or loving alienation is something that is variously sort of manifested within all of us. Even as we embrace a collectivity that is politically necessary and emotionally sustaining for us, and even as we understand that this alienation itself is like a strategic product and mechanism of white supremacy, but I wonder what is gained or lost if we build this alienation into our collective identity and our initiatives and our internal culture of communication as we work and we organize together. If we sort of foreground a commitment to seeing and understanding, or even like harnessing something in these frustrated empathies and these disconnections and these really cumbersome, really incomplete translations between each other. And I guess like it's basically, I wonder if how anyone thinks, not just you, Professor Crenshaw, because I feel like you've been put on the spot a lot, whether and how these kind of like Black on Black alienations, so to speak, can be another site of effective value for our decolonial work here at this place and beyond.
Thank you so much, Khalil. So yeah, I will suggest like you to, if you want to say a few words about this.
Well, and you know what, I want to maybe kill two birds with one stone. I know people probably have a couple things that they want to also share. And maybe there's some folks who have something to say, particularly in response to the last, two questions, because they do have to do with how we relate to each other in spaces like this. I love the, reading the room. So reading the room, I'm thinking that folks might have something to offer in response to. I thought this was a great place to kind of transition.
I'm trying to read the room. Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Max. I'm a first-year law researcher. First, I want to thank the DI for organizing this and all the panelists and Professor Crenshaw. It's not necessarily a question, but I think especially the presentation from Professor Crenshaw was really interesting. It's very easy, I think, for a lot of us Europeans to look across the pond and see these kind of things happening in America and then say, oh, America being anti-woke and racist again. But there's been a lot of stuff happening at EUI in recent times on this front, especially from the DI. And actually last week, there was a news article published. It's a small, like Brussels EU-centric newspaper, but much more important is about like that they were quoting researchers, graduates, and even members of faculty in the article. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because, so the title of the article is Top EU Research University Sees Explosion in Anti-EU Students. So already that I think is quite interesting with the whole anti-woke framing that you had presented. And then there's two parts of the article that I want to stress on. So there's one part where they are quoting researchers from here, talking about the DI. The quote is, the group's presence has rendered the academic atmosphere toxic, according to researchers with the more traditional pro-EU views. And then another thing happens about the alternative State of the Union that I'm involved in the Researchers Union and that we organized, where we, to promote it, we made posters where there was quotes from the guests that were invited, for example, Joseph Borrell, literally quoting what they said without any substantive content from us. And what is quoted in the article is about a faculty member says that faculty members were torn between supporting freedom of expression of the researchers to criticize the event and the desire to impose better etiquette. So then immediately it was framed in a question of the rebel researchers that are not behaving
properly when big politicians are coming. So I just wanted to like put this out there, maybe also with the risk of not making many friends here at the EUI with this, under the ambit of this liberal ambivalence and the centrist acceptance that you also talked about in your presentation, and also that Daphné talked about, the institutional and also general pushback about certain types of activism happening here at the EUI. I don't have much of a question, but yeah, it was important for me to share.
Thank you. I'll suggest we take like 2 more, and then you, because yeah, perfect. Like we have one online, I think. You have 2 online, so.
Perhaps Arpita and Ruth can now ask their questions. Arpita first and Ruth next.
Thanks, Raghavi. Also a huge thank you. It's just so heartening to see this happen. As someone from the EUI, having sort of been through, one may say, the tough perils and perilous journey that it kind of places, right, for you to overcome. I just want to kind of add to what Lulu was saying in terms of this risk of self-censorship. I think one of the things I noticed was I was looking at my writing prior to the EUI, during the EUI, and after the EUI. What tends to happen is the pressure as a person of color in a very white institute like the EUI forces you to create a vocabulary to become legible, justify your research, be understood, and translate what might be very affective, as you said, Raghavi, affective emotional subjects, like mine was indigenous rights in India, and to make a convincing case of why the world should care. And it creates such a language that gets doused with not just self-censorship, but self-doubt, and almost like a pressure to sort of not just convince the reader, but literally yank the reader away from their situation of comfort and bring them into your context. And I've noticed that my writing now has vestiges of that traumatic experience of being at the EUI and having to constantly engage in that violence of being legible. That now I'm trying to free my writing from that, almost as if from being kind to my reader and trying to make myself explainable, I've now reached a situation where I'm being hard on my reader, saying, this is who I am, this is where I'm at, meet me where I want to be met, while also obviously providing clues and navigational tools along the way. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that the self-censorship doesn't just stop at sort of reading the room and wanting to be heard, but it translates into, or you internalize it so much that it's a lot of work of unlearning after those experiences. And it's like, you have to decolonize yourself as well to a great extent.
Thank you, Arpita. Ruth?
Yes, hello. Kim, hello. I think I was the one who invited to the EUI and I didn't know about the immigration event. So this was amazing. I am trying to decolonialize myself. I was a law professor at the EUI department between 2008 and 2016. And I basically wanted to thank you all and to give you hope for the work you're doing. When I joined the EUI, I was pregnant. There wasn't a maternity leave. Can you believe that? That was only in 2008. No single department had parity of women in composition. There was no anti-harassment policy. Some of my male colleagues, one in particular, used to offer his female PhD researchers to work as babysitters for him. This was 2008, 2018. I'm not talking about the Middle Ages. Now, there was a gender and sexuality working group, just like the working groups that you are establishing. And they at some point gave up. They fought very, very hard in the last year. They were just basically writing their PhDs and they gave up. And part of the reason was there's an existential question. Was it making any difference? And part of the reason is because they couldn't see the progress, advancing fast enough. They had 4 years to write their PhDs and the progress wasn't happening fast enough. Now, we still don't have a gender paradise at the EUI. We still have had just one interim president, we know that. But we do have a few departments that have now, gender parity composition. We have sexual minorities among the faculty. We finally have an anti-harassment policy, an equality and diversity inclusion officer. All of this is not to say that I think a lot of work still needs to be done. It does, but I think a lot has changed in very few years. And a lot of that was also thanks to the seeds planted by the researchers run initiatives. So this is just my way of saying thank you, because I'm learning and decolonizing myself thanks to you, but also keep it up. We had some wonderful women in my time. Kim Crenshaw came, Catherine McKinnon came, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was invited at the time. And researchers just took so much from these highlight moments. And I think through the pressure that researchers exercise, this is how we get these amazing guests like Professor Crenshaw today. So keep it up, and thank you for the wonderful work you're doing.
So I would like to give you the opportunity to say a few more words, but then to continue the discussion with Prosecco outside, which is where you put us. So just please.
And I understand there's champagne outside. And I'm the only thing that stands between us and that.
No one will take the tray or the plate from you.
Exactly. So I promised something at the beginning, and I think it is a good place to end. I talked about how excited I was to be part of this conversation. And I think I want to build on what you all just heard. And refer those of you who want to know more about the story. Critical race theory actually came from this kind of formation: students interacting in institutions where the logics of marginalization and exclusion were given back to us when we were making demands for more courses and more people like us in the classroom. The institution had to say what was up to that moment just implicit. And once it's said, it gives you a greater target for analysis, interrogation, alternative ways of framing what the institution is for. When you frame what the institution is for differently, you frame who should have access to it differently. So critical race theory actually comes from precisely this kind of formation. So on the note you just heard, I wanted to say absolutely the work often takes far longer than our tenure in these institutions allow us to see. It's only 10 years, 20 years later that you can connect what has happened to what you actually started. So that I wanted to foreground and celebrate, and also say it is always contingent. You can never rely on what has been accomplished. That, if anything, is what we're learning from the anti-woke campaign. In fact, the more successful you may be in entering into public discourse, the more likely it is that you're going to experience a backlash. I firmly think that it was the tremendous outpouring of support and grief and demand that happened after George Floyd's killing that created this backlash. The backlash is more powerful than the movement that prompted us. Our goal all the time is to make sure that the advances that we are creating in terms of knowledge, in terms of political mobilization, are never outdistanced by the retrenchment that will come. The retrenchment will always come. We just have to anticipate it better in advance. I mean, that's real. You just know it's going to have to come. And it is partly also, I love this question about dealing with the alienation. I think we should have more language and ways of capturing it and anticipating it. And also finding that alienation even at home, right? There are ways in which we're alienated from each other. It's not just an international phenomenon. And with that, I want to thank you all for being part of this. This was amazing, such a wonderfully organized thing. And looking forward to toasting all of us and you all in a couple of minutes. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't think I can say anything relevant after what you just said. So let's toast, and thanks to all my colleagues who accepted to be discussing here, and also people online, Fartun and Khalil. Yeah, have a drink by your own. Yeah, yeah, thank you, everybody.